Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. And we also plan to, in the next few episodes, give you some clues as to how to maintain your peace or even get to a place of peace in dealing with the upcoming and constant chaos that we are experiencing here on Earth right now. So with that in mind, today's guest is Amanda McCordic. She's coming to us from New Brunswick, Canada. She is a mother, a wife, a lawyer, an entrepreneur, a terminal cancer survivor, and a Holy Fire Karuna Reiki master. I did not meet Amanda up at the Northeast Reiki retreat this year, but I did meet a few people from Canada at that retreat, but I'm interested in Amanda's story today. In December of 2019, she was diagnosed with an aggressive breast cancer, and by April of 2020, the cancer was deemed terminal. Being a classic type A personality, she made the conscious decision to live with hope and to focus on healing rather than dying. Well, and as you can see, she's still with us, so she did something right. I could go on and on about her story, but I think we'll let her tell you her story. As part of that story, while she was going through her cancer experience, she also had to deal with witnessing her husband's mental health decline. And in March of 2020, he committed suicide in their home. So this was something that was added to the emotional and spiritually challenging days of her life. And luckily, she had Reiki to lean into to help her through that. So I'm not going to say anything more other than she's now living with her second husband, Brad, her children, Ethan and Amelia, her dogs, Larson and Zoe, and cats, Jake Peralata and Cleocatra. Love those names. She remains healthy, strong, vibrant, and incredibly thankful for her second chance. So take it away, Amanda, and you can tell us your story, and then I'll ask you some questions for detail.
Yeah, so I kind of grew up the classic oldest daughter. I was very much a people pleaser, felt very, very driven from a young age to not just succeed, but to be, the top of the top. In 2019, I found myself in a kind of the beginning of what I would call my hard days or my challenging days. I had left my husband, my first husband, and we were kind of struggling with some of that. And we had actually just reconciled when I found my tumor, my first tumor. It was in December in 2019, and I was in Toys R Us with my daughter. And my bra strap actually fell down, and I just slid my hand down to kind of pull it up, and I felt the tumor. And it was, by that time, it was the size of an egg. So how I missed it, I'm not sure. But so then kind of everything kind of started happening very quickly. And but the amazing thing, I think, the first kind of big amazing point in my story was about 6 weeks before that, I had gone to a psychic medium. Christy Flynn was her name, and she travels across Canada doing readings. And I had purchased a reading for me and my assistant as like a birthday present for her. Christy Flynn was so good. I mean, she looked into my eyes. She told me exactly what my personality was like. She told me, describe family members who were there, and they were the family members that I would have expected to be there. Yeah. And she told me two things that really stuck with me. One, she told me that my husband was going to die and then I could slow it down, but I couldn't stop it. And two, she told me that she knew I was terrible at self care, and that if I ignored everything else that she told me, that I needed to go find this local Reiki master, Pam Allen LeBlanc, and I needed to book the first available session she had. She told me she didn't care if I had to cancel things, move things. I needed to take the first available appointment. And that was really drilled into me because I was notorious for canceling massages and counseling in any form of self care. I really my thinking at the time was I could only it was only if there was time left over from everybody else's needs and crises that could I actually then turn to myself. And that just never happened. I was a divorce lawyer. I was married to a man with addiction and mental health issues who also ran a company. I had kids. They were in activities, so there was very little time. But she was so intense. So I went home and I Googled Pam Allen LeBlanc, found her, went on her little portal, booked the first session, and kind of forgot about it. Well, it turns out that first session was about 12 hours after I found my tumor. So I literally found it on a Monday night. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m., I'm in my first Reiki session. And so for me, Reiki and my cancer journey, or the cancer journey, those are kind of, so, at least in the beginning, we're very tied hand in hand. And I really see them both as just an incredible blessing that helped get me out of a life that I easily could have lived another 50 years in, struggling and suffering and pushing through. Um, so yeah, so that was in December of 2019. I was actually misdiagnosed originally. They didn't realize how aggressive it was. Um, so that kind of dictated all the timelines. And so by the time they did the mastectomy in February of 2020, it had gone all into my chest wall. It had gone from one tumor to seven tumors, and ultimately it had got into my bones. So in April 2nd, 2020, I was diagnosed terminal. And of course, like my first thought was, if it was the day before, I would have thought it was an April Fool's joke, right? Like I thought, like, how funny would that have been? Um, so my oncologist was lovely, but she was very clear that I was going to die and I was going to die quickly. Originally, they had told me kind of 3 to 5 years. But then I remember her saying very softly, like, some people go much faster. And of course, I realized afterwards that she meant me, that she thought I was going to go much faster. So April of 2020 was also when everything was shutting down for COVID. So I had to go to the appointment alone. Now, luckily, my best friend's a doctor that worked at the hospital, so she came with me. But my husband couldn't come. I had to come home and call my mom on the phone and tell her. We were in bubbles at that time. So, or we weren't even in bubbles. We were just in households. So I could only be with my household people. Um, but I think that actually kind of saved my life too, because I was so busy. I've always been so busy looking after everybody else's feelings and emotions that I don't think if I had been put in a room full of people, I would have been so busy looking after how they were dealing with it that I wouldn't have dealt with it. The other amazing thing that happened was because of COVID, the New Brunswick court system shut down. That never happens. We get floods, we work through floods. We forest fires, we are open for everything. But for the first time ever, COVID was shut. And my husband kind of hid in drugs and alcohol. I hid in work and shopping. And so I couldn't go out shopping because of COVID, and I couldn't work. Um, and so I lost the two big places where I was hid, and I was left with the reality of my own mortality, and what that meant for my family. We have two kids. My stepson, who's 10 years older than my daughter, but I've raised him since he was 9, so he's mine. He'll always be mine. Um, but you start thinking about what happens when you're gone, and one of the things they had told me to do, or that I had read that I should do, is envision life without me. And so I can tell you that it's a very painful exercise. I cried. I'm sure there was snot too. Like, some people cry beautifully. I'm not one of them. So I did all that. I started visualizing what everybody's life was going to be like without me. And it was a very difficult process, but it was incredibly liberating. As so much of the things that I went through from kind of 2019 forward, while often painful and challenging, incredibly rewarding, totally worth it. And that was one of those exercises. But I am a type A and I am stubborn. And my oncologist had said, Amanda, this isn't something you can problem solve. You are most likely going to die of cancer. I got a second opinion, another very lovely doctor. He was a little bit younger and maybe a little bit more hopeful, less jaded. I had said to him, I want 10 years is what I need. My daughter at the time was almost 9 when I was diagnosed terminal. So I thought, if I had 10 years, I could get her through high school, and then she could have a gap year. I could die during her gap year, and then she could just continue on to university. And so I was such a planner. So I said, I need 10 years. And he said, oh, Amanda. He just, kind of shook his head. And I said, is it possible though? And, I had taken by the time I got to my second opinion, I was doing a bunch of things that I felt were going to help heal me and give my body the best chance to heal. And so, I had come in with just almost a comical bag of vitamins with me that I was taking, and my list of all the things I was doing, including meditation and daily, a lot of Reiki, dealing with, pent up emotions, all this stuff I had read. And he smiled at me, I said, is there a chance at all? And I kind of pointed to all the things I was doing. And he said, highly, highly improbable, maybe possible. And it was really all I really needed was that maybe possible. I said, I need faint hope to work towards. And so that's what I started. It was, I thought of, maybe if I meditate, 2 hours every day under a red infrared light, maybe that will only increase my chances of living 20%. But if I also cut out all the sugar, and if I also take Rick Simpson oil, and if I also add up all these other little things, eventually, I used to think all the time, how could cancer possibly survive in this body? I'm giving it nothing to work with. So thankfully, I didn't have a lot of really harsh chemo because they said there was no point. So I did some immunotherapy and I did some radiation. But then I really leaned into the kind of more of the alternative healing and this idea that I was in charge of my body and my health. And I needed to take in information, and I could no longer abdicate the carriage of this body to somebody else. And that's, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I kind of had said to the first doctor, what am I looking at? And he's like, oh, there's nothing here we can't fix. And I was like, perfect. So how long am I going to be out of work? 6 months to a year. Great. I'll take a year off. It'll be great. And I changed nothing because I thought somebody else could fix it. In that moment, it crystallized that the only person that could heal me was me. The second part of that train of thought took longer, which is, and I can't heal anybody else. So the first part of my journey was really learning how to love myself. I think I would have struggled to do it if it hadn't been for terminal cancer, because it was so ingrained in me to put everybody else first. I didn't like myself, but I couldn't put my finger on why, because all of the checklists that I thought I was all the targets I thought I was supposed to be hitting, I was hitting them. I had a successful career. I had a successful business. My husband was very successful. We went on nice vacations. I had lots of jewelry. We have a big house. We have, 2 healthy kids. Our daughter did dance. Our son played hockey. I checked all the boxes early, and yet I still felt so disconnected and exhausted and just so uncomfortable in my own skin. And my doctor, my first oncologist, had said, because I had said, should I exercise? And she said, only if it brings you happiness. Well, I'm not an exerciser. I'm a sitter. I said, should I change my diet? She said, there's no point. And she said, you really just need to do whatever brings you joy for as long as you can. And I had this moment of realization where I thought, I don't know what brings me joy. Who has had time for joy? And I had no idea. And it took me a long time to figure out what actually brought me joy, because it was not, there were things that made me happy. I knew that. But as far as joy and peacefulness and contentness, that was, that was not anything that I had spent any energy on in my adult life. So I continued, they expected me to kind of decline very quickly. Um, I had a meeting in May of that same year where I fought to find out if it was in my brain, because they told me it would just explode through me. Um, Thankfully, it wasn't in my brain. Um, it was in my bones in 3 places. In August, I showed up for my first in-person oncology appointment, because again, it was still COVID, so everything was, um, everything was different. And my oncologist, again, very kind lady, said, "Oh, I didn't think I'd actually see you today." And I said, "Oh, I would miss an oncology appointment." And she said, "No, Amanda, we didn't think you'd still be alive." And so when they said some people go much faster, I didn't realize it meant like 4 months and me. And I think that's great that I didn't realize that, because I think it would have been more than I could have handled. But I just continued to get stronger and stronger and stronger. By November, I had my first scans. I got the results of those in January. And in fact, it was the second oncologist, the rat oncologist, who had told me that it was maybe possible. He was the one to give me the results. And he kind of came in, and he's a tall man and he's young and he had this big smile on his face, which you don't really see very often in the oncology department. And he had said, "Did anyone talk to you about your scans?" And I said, "Well, my oncologist had mentioned they were good." And he said, "No, that's not the word. They're great." And so, he proceeded to tell me how there was no signs of cancer in me. And so he showed me both scans, showed me where the bright new white bone was, where there had before. Cancer's kind of gray and kind of tentacly, because it reaches out to spread. That was all gone, and I just had this bright, shiny white bone. And it was just an amazing day where I really, I'd had the feeling from time to time. I would hear this voice in my head, and it actually started, well, I've always kind of heard it, but as far as the cancer goes, it had really started the day after I had been diagnosed terminal. I was sitting in my bathtub crying, because that was my favorite place to cry, feeling very, very sorry for myself. And this no nonsense voice that I sometimes hear, and I know it's not me, because it's not trying to persuade. It speaks the truth. If I believe it or not, it's of no consequence. And it just said, "Cry as much as you want, but you're not actually going to die from this." And it was just very, and every once in a while I would hear that, "You're not going to die from this." And I started getting it, that kind of became like, I'm not going to die from this. At first they had told me 3 to 5 was my best case scenario. So I decided that I was going to live 50 years, which would be 10 times longer than their predictions, which would have made me 86. Now I think I'm going to live to be over 100. It just keeps growing. So I was kind of finding this new zest for life. And, I had drastically cut down my law firm. I still kept it open, but I drastically cut it down. I spent a lot of time saying no, especially to my husband, who I had really never said no to. Um, he was brilliant, and he was kind, and he was very charismatic. I adored him, and he adored me, but he had addiction issues. He had drug issues. He had mental health issues. Um, it was very much the Matt show, not the Matt and Amanda show. It was the Matt show, and I was a supporting character, and I took that very serious. But cancer gave me, I called it the cancer card. It gave me permission to say, "No, I can't do that. That's not good for me." Or, "No, that's not good for my mental health." Or, "No, I'm sorry, I have Reiki." And in fact, just to kind of go back from that first session, I didn't know what Reiki was. I had heard the word, but I didn't really know what it was. And in fact, it probably took me about 6 months to really understand it. But I knew, as I laid there, and it was all done by distance, because again, this is COVID. As I laid there in my bed, after it was all done, I thought, "What was that?" And then I realized that I had never felt better than I had during that hour. Never. That I was peaceful and calm inside. that I could stand myself. Like when I was on maternity leave, our neighbors used to joke I couldn't stay home. By 9 o'clock, I had to go somewhere. And it's true. I just couldn't be with myself. I didn't know what to do if I couldn't hide in other people's problems. Um, I prioritized Reiki in my life because I realized it was intoxicating. This feeling of being comfortable in my own skin and having clarity and release. And so I started doing Reiki every week. And then in May of 2020, I did my level 1 and 2. And 6 months later, I did my master's. And 6 months later, after that, I did my Karuna. It was, like I wanted it. I wanted more and more and more. And I've gone back and done all of those classes several times again. So I was kind of prioritizing myself, and I had this zest for life. Some of my friends thought I was crazy. A lot of people thought I had lost my mind because I had this terminal diagnosis, and I was just glowing. I was happy, and I was, and my oncologist thought I had lost my mind. She said, "I think you're in denial," and I said, "Okay, you think I have false hope? I think I have faint hope. Either way, I have hope. Worst case scenario, I have faint hope right up to the day that I die. You think I'm going to die anyway." So for me, it didn't, having hope didn't seem like there was no downside to it for me. Um, but there was very much like a yin and yang in our household. So as I was so focused on healing, my husband was very focused on fast tracking his demise. He used to say to me all the time, "I'm not scared to die. I'm just scared that it will go wrong." He used to say, "I think I've done everything I need to do in this life. Like the next chapter is supposed to be about you." And I'd say, "No, Maddie, and I guilted that man into living for years. Like, it was done out of love and it was done out of fear, but it was still done. I guilted him for many, many years because of my own mortality that was impending." We had a lot of talks about death. And in one of those talks, he actually said to me, "Amanda, I have no desire to be on this earth without you. But more than that, I have no desire to be on an earth where you're suffering. So I don't want you to suffer. I would never want you to suffer. And so when you're ready to go, I'll understand." And I realized in that moment that that's exactly what I had done for years, because we knew that there was an underlying mental health issue, and we had tried to get some help for him, and it hadn't gone well. I think his charisma and his success, and the strong relationships he had around him, they kind of masked the depth of the problem. And in fact, one of the psychiatrists he worked with, Matt came out and he said, "I'm fine." He said, "If I wasn't fine, my business wouldn't still be running. I wouldn't still be married to my wife. I wouldn't have friends for 20 plus years. He says it's just depression." And we, of course, knew it was something much more serious than that. But I knew that Matt was suffering, and I knew that his mind was not good, and he was becoming more and more dangerous. So he was emotionally and financially very abusive, but in the end, he became physically abusive, which at the beginning of our relationship, I never would have foretold. So I was kind of healing in all these amazing ways, and I was letting go of all of these preconceived ideas I had, or things I thought were preconceived. Like, for instance, Pam, who I continue to work with, my Reiki lady, she had said, "Amanda, your worth isn't tied to how much you produce." And I remember, I shot up in bed and said, "Yes, it is. Of course it is. I'm not like," and she said, "No, it's not." And I said, I don't think that's right." It probably took me 3 months to really get my head around the fact that in and of myself, I had worth. If I did nothing else for the rest of my life, I have worth. And it was, so I had all these big things that I was, and I was such a martyr. I was a huge martyr, letting go of all those things. And I used to, I meditated daily and for hours. And again, I have ADHD, so if you had told me 2 years before that I would love meditation, I would have said that's not possible. My brain doesn't work that way. But it actually does if you keep at it. And now it's my favorite thing to do. Um, but in those meditations, I used to say, universe, take anything from me that is holding me back, except for Matt. You know, take anything you want from me, but not Matt. I knew. And it took me about 6 months to get my head around the fact that I couldn't save him. So the first part of the learning was only I can save me. And the second part was, and I can't save anyone else. And I had to accept that I could not save him and that it was his life. And only he knew how hard it was to be him. And so in January, we had a long talk, January of 2021. And I said to him, you know, I don't think you want to die. I think you don't want to live the way you're living, and I don't blame you. I said, but I've never met anyone that has the will to live that you do. Like, you're so tough. I said, so I think we should tackle this like we tackled the cancer I had. And I had found a mental health rehab. It was a combo. It was on the ocean. It was beautiful. And we started talking about him going. And, you know, he just kept saying, I'm just not interested in living. I'm just scared to die, but I'm not interested in living. And when I, in fact, was diagnosed, he had said, he had taken it very hard because he said, you know, how do you have cancer? You don't drink, you don't smoke. Like, how do you have cancer? Meanwhile, he, you know, he was a pack and a half, 2-pack a day kind of guy. And I had said to him, like, don't be so sure that you don't have cancer. And I had actually was quite concerned that he had cancer. But in that same conversation, he said to me, Amanda, I stopped taking my blood pressure medication the day that you were diagnosed terminal. I stopped taking my diabetic medication. I'm not taking my cholesterol medication. What makes you think that if I had cancer, I would want to stop it? And again, that was part of me learning that I needed to focus on healing myself instead of dumping all my energy into trying to save them. So from there, it unwound pretty quickly. On March 29th, 30th, we don't know the exact time, but he did commit suicide. He shot himself in our bedroom, in our bed. And he had said for years that he was scared to shoot himself because he was scared that he would live. And I had said, like, oh, I think that's a freak thing. I don't think it happens. But on that day, me and the kids had been out of the house for about a week and a half because he had a mental health episode and had exploded. And that was something that was fairly regular in our life by that point, that we would leave. There'd be some kind of blow up. We would leave until it was safe and then come back. And so I was pushing him really hard to go to that rehab. And he had said, okay, you know, come back tomorrow morning, and if I'm still alive, I'll go, but I don't think I want to go. And so that morning I got to the house, I parked in the garage, I did Reiki for a few minutes to collect myself. I remember hustling up our stairs. We have a two-story house, so I was hustling upstairs. And I stopped right before I got to the door, and I thought, you know, like, don't just go in and start talking about rehab. Just go love him as he is. You know, so often in hindsight, I had put, you know, I had dangled my love, like, you do this, and then, you know, and it was like, I just love him as he is. And I went in, and the last thought that I remember in that room was, what's the red stuff all over his face? And so he was sitting up in bed, and he had shot himself, and he was alive. I could hear him breathing. Breathing was very normal. And so I have no memories of leaving the room. My next memory was trying to get my hands to work at the back door. We have these French doors that look out into our backyard, and I couldn't get my hands to work. But my last call had been to my friend who was a doctor, so I hit her name and called her. And so, of course, everything very quickly happened. She came, the ambulance came, the police came. You know, him not dying instantly was his worst fear. And I had known from very early on in our marriage that that's how it would end. or I suspected that that's how it would end. I didn't think we'd divorce. I didn't think he'd leave me. I didn't think I'd leave him. I thought that's how it would end. And I had spent a lot of time thinking about what it would be like. It was a million times worse. It was absolutely horrific. But it was all a gift. And I am so incredibly thankful for all of it. Because he didn't die, they scanned his brain when he got to the ER, and the neurologist came in and said, kind of somewhat casually, really, did anyone talk to you about his schizophrenia? And I said, is that what it was? And he said, yeah, his whole frontal lobe is just dark. And once I kind of got home and over this and started researching schizophrenia, that is exactly what our reality was like. You know, when the darkness would come over him, he was a different person. I used to say I could be on fire and he could be holding a hose and he wouldn't put me out in that moment, even though I knew that he loved me. You know, so many nights I would say to him, you know, there'd be a big blow up, and then after the storm was over, his storm, which could be a day, could be 3 days, you know, we'd often kind of sit next to each other, exhausted from it. And I'd say, you know, man, I think you're going to end up killing me. And he said, I'll kill myself before I kill you. I promise I won't let it go that far. So it was schizophrenia. And it was something that no one had even suggested to us. And all the times we'd try to get him help. So that was shocking. And it felt validating to have a name put on it. And I thought I never would have known that if he hadn't have died the way he died, or if he hadn't lived when he shot himself. Because he was still alive and relatively young, they pushed really hard for organ donation, which I really struggled with. I was fine with, you know, I was an organ donor, but I didn't know how Matt would feel about it. And more than that, I felt morally guilty at giving somebody those lungs and organs. You know, he terribly abused his body. And I would think, like, can you imagine waiting 7 years for lungs and then those are the lungs you get? But they explained to me that the people that were waiting for those lungs, if they didn't get those lungs, they would not get any lungs. And I liked the idea of Matt's organs being given a chance to heal. So we agreed. Me and my kids talked about it. We agreed that we wanted everything to go so that if anyone else, any other child didn't have to lose their dad, that we would want that. The night before Matt actually had died, me and him had a long talk. And I knew that he was thinking about it. I didn't really believe that he would do it, but we were talking openly about it. And I knew there was a moment where I knew that I couldn't leave anything unsaid. And so I said to him, you know, he was over the top with everything. You know, he couldn't throw a party, he had to throw the best party. You know, everything was over the top with him. We call it Matt Wilson style. And I said, so if you die, you need to leave me signs that you're okay. And they need to be Matt Wilson level style signs. Like, there can be no doubt. And he had promised that he would, even though he really wasn't sure what he believed about the afterlife. That night, I said to him, do you want me to explain what I believe? Because I had been going through this kind of spiritual growth period. You know, I was coming into all these beliefs. And he had been respectful but distant about them. But that night, he said, yeah, tell me what you believe. And so I told him everything. And he listened. And so it wasn't very long after he died that we started getting signs that he was okay. We find dimes everywhere. When he was in hospital and he was non-responsive, I was holding his hand and I was debating what to do about the organ donation. And I had said to him, okay, if you don't want to get your organs, you need to die like right now. Like, just turn off the lights. And I said, it's okay for you to go. My grampy will be there. My grampy, you know, I am who I am apart from my grand. I was raised by a single mom, and he was really just a huge part of my life and who I am. And so I said, my grandpa will be there waiting for you, because he knew how important my grandpa was. And so after I was allowed back into my house, which was several days, um, I actually went and sat in our bedroom where he had shot himself before they cleaned it up, because it was important to me that I not just suppress that memory, because I had spent my whole life suppressing memories. And I thought, this isn't going to be another wound that's going to be pushed down and allowed to fester in the dark. And so I went in and I looked around the room and it was horrific, absolutely horrific. But it was really healing, really, really healing. I'm so thankful I did. I just sat, I walked around and then I just sat. Reiki, and I released the trauma from the moment for me and for Matt and for the room. And I noticed Matt struggled with a cocaine addiction. He had told me in the days leading up that he was really over the cocaine. He died with a pile of cocaine beside him, which, is shocking, but I never thought Matt would die with cocaine. I thought he would use it all, and then, the fact that he had died, without using it was it meant something to me. Also, right beside where he died was my grandfather's obituary. I don't know where my husband had found it, but there it was, my grandfather's obituary. When I went into my closet to get dressed to go to the funeral home, he had destroyed all of my black clothing. I couldn't wear it. And I really took that as a symbol, as he didn't want me mourning. So I wore white, because literally all of my black clothes I couldn't wear. We started finding dimes right away. And as I was walking into the funeral home, Planet's funeral, I got a call from the hospital, and they informed me that they couldn't use any of his organs because he was full of metastatic renal cancer. And probably didn't have very long left. And so, there's just all these bombshells. So we got through the funeral. It was a COVID funeral, so it was a very small funeral, but we were able to host it virtually. And in fact, that's been a gift as well. That funeral is still available online if you look up his name, Matthew David Wilson. It's been viewed over 1,400 times the last time I checked. He was a very unconventional person. If there was ever a rule, he wanted to rush to the other side of it. And so I decided that the celebration of his life would be the same way. So it was open and honest. It was, some would say, improper. But it was exactly what was right for him. And I talked for the first time openly about his darkness and how he had struggled with that darkness, that he had done all these big, wonderful things and had meant so much to so many people. People still reach out and tell me these wonderful little stories about how he helped them. He helped them without looking for anything back, without telling anybody. He had just an enormous heart, but he also had this darkness, and we had worked very hard to hide the darkness. And partly because we had hid it so well, people were shocked. Everybody was shocked. So I had spent the year healing from cancer, and I always thought that my life would kind of be defined kind of pre-cancer, after cancer. But I knew as soon as Matt died that it was a before Matt, with Matt, and after Matt. Losing him was a big pivot in my life. And it got messy. I don't think I went through all the 7 stages of grief. I think I ping-ponged back and forth between them. One day I thought that he was just the most amazing man that had ever walked, and I couldn't believe the loss of him. And the next moment I was thinking about all the times he had hurt me and broken things and destroyed the house and, disappeared for weeks. And I had anger. I had a lot of anger. And the bulk of the anger I had at myself for the things that I had accepted, for the lack of boundaries that I had. And so I decided that I was going to treat it like I had the cancer and I was going to focus on healing. And so I started sitting with my emotions instead of shoving them down. And I figured out that if I talked to myself like I would of my daughter when she was little, that I could figure out what was behind all the pain. Because it didn't matter if it was fear or anger. All of that was fear is what was behind all of that. Just a different manifestation of fear. So I thought, okay, I'm going to really get to know myself and what makes me tick. And so I started, when I would feel these big emotions, I'd say, well, why do you feel that? What makes you think that? Because, like just keep following up in a loving, kind way versus what I had done for the first 38 years, which was immediately criticize myself, tell myself I had no reason to feel that. There are so many people that are suffering worse. How dare you even, complain about what you're going through? So I turned the critic off in my head and I just started listening. And I spent an enormous amount of time meditating. I had been a fairly social person. I completely fell out of all of that. I really spent about a year in my backyard, just thinking and healing and crying and cursing, um, and just trying to really make sense of it all. And that continues. I shouldn't even say it continues on. Like that's never going to end. I think I've healed something and then 3 months later I feel a pain point again and I'm like, okay, I need to heal that a little bit deeper now. But
I'm
it was
going
a
to
very
jump
spiritual
in
time in my life.
just for a second here,
Yes. So
Amanda.
sorry.
Give you a break. Uh,
Thank you.
well, these tools that you mention in terms of how you dealt with this trauma, uh, how you've been caring for yourself and taking care of yourself. You credit Reiki with a lot of that, but were there any books you were reading at the time that helped you with some of these tools? Because these
Yeah.
are, in the spiritual world, the tools that you are mentioning are ones that people work on for years to try to master. So I'm just curious about that.
So, yeah, my spiritual growth was fast tracked, I feel, in a lot of ways. Um, Part of that, there was definitely books, which I'll talk about in a minute, but when I had radiation, it actually made me not so much sick, it just drained all the energy I had. And what I ended up doing is when you do Reiki with Pam, she records the session when you're in the energy and she sends it to you. And so you can listen to that over and over and over again. Well, for the summer of 2020, I was so sick. I couldn't even watch TV. I couldn't keep my eyes open. So I would literally lay in this like hammock in my backyard, watching the trees and listening to these meditations on repeat. You know, 12, 14 hours a day, just Reiki meditations on repeat. I would nap. I would be awake. So I really, I was just in the energy. It was just such a unique opportunity to be in the energy. Nobody expected me to do anything. It wasn't like, well, you have to go get your, like I couldn't, and at the time I was really frustrated, but now I see it as just an amazing period of incubation for me. Right. So that fast tracked a lot and I spent a lot of time, in classic type A personality. Once I'm on board, I'm all on board. So I really did just dive into it. Um, as far as books, the first book I would say would be The Biology of Belief. One of my daughter's friends had actually given it to me, and she had an autoimmune disease they couldn't figure out, but she had healed herself through the energy work. And so I understood the importance of how I talk to my body. And in fact, I had created, once I had my Reiki masters, I actually had created a long meditation for myself where I went through step by step by step by step what my body needed to do to break down the old cells, to break down the cancer cells, to create new cells, and that was a long meditation. And, and I remember knowing that the tone needed to be loving, to love my body, to thank my body for getting me through this, not to blame my body for letting me down, because my body hadn't
Yeah.
let me down. My body had given me so many cries of help that I just, you know, I used to carry a comically large bottle of naproxen in my purse, and I lived on naproxen. You know, any kind of pain my body was throwing, I just naproxen right over it. Um, so biology of belief was a big one for me. Um, Dying to be me was very pivotal for me, because that gave me proof that somebody else, had been on the verge of dying of cancer, had come back and was still. And so many of the things, um, it's so funny. The book came in through Amazon, and I didn't remember buying it, but I was buying a lot of books at that time. And I kind of had paid attention. I kind of noticed it, and I put it on the corner of my desk. And then I had a Reiki session immediately after that. And at the end of that Reiki session, Pam said, "Listen, I haven't read this book, but it's coming in really clear that you need to. It's called Dying to Be Me." She goes, and I forget who it's by. And I literally reached over and said, "It came in today. I don't even remember ordering it." And so I sat down and read that in the next couple of hours. And then finally the third one for me, and I read everything I can get, as much as time allows. Heal, spontaneous spontaneous remission. Sorry, it's called. And basically, this doctor decided to focus on people who didn't die, the outliers. She said, we always study the people who die from cancer. Let's study, and any given cancer has so many that don't respond the way they're supposed to. And so she had studied all the different things they did, and there was the top 7 as kind of, or top 10. And I was already doing all those things by the time I got to the book. But talk about, really this journey has really been led by Reiki, in that Reiki would lead me to understand. I would get the information I needed just before the pivotal time. Like, for instance, stem cells. I didn't know what stem cells were on a Tuesday. I learned them on Wednesday, and then Thursday in my oncologist appointment, we talk about them and why they're important. I didn't know about them on Monday. The universe lined so many things up for me that, I felt like my soul growth and my understandings were just, but that was partly too because I had nothing else. I was focusing on nothing else. It had my total attention. Because I got that kind of, when you get terminal cancer, people don't expect a lot from you. And they expect even less of you when your husband has committed suicide. So I had these pockets of time where it was socially acceptable for me just to focus on myself. And William Rand stuff. So I like the way he writes. So, his manuals, certainly I've spent a lot of time with his manuals, listened to a lot of his podcasts. And in 2022, I actually got to do my Karuna training with him in Detroit, which was fantastic. Highly recommend. He is as good in person. But that was the feedback I was getting from Pam, when I was doing work with her, is that my guides were very happy at my progress.
Yeah.
That I was all in, right? And yeah. So during that summer, though, as I was healing, I was doing a lot of work with tarot cards, which again, I was kind of self-teaching and playing with. My intuition was getting stronger, and I've always been, my career was a divorce lawyer, and I used to always kind of have this little parlor trick where somebody could sit down and I could tell them with pretty good accuracy what their ex was like. Okay, so he is selfish. He's this. He's going to fight over that. He's going to be very upset about you touching his pension. And and I never really knew how I could do it, but I knew with confidence. And the clients were always thought I was some kind of magician. So I always had a lot of intuition, and I started paying attention to it more because it's kind of like when you listen to it, good things happen, which makes you listen to
Yeah.
it more and trust it more. And it's just like, it's this kind of an upward spiral.
Okay, I'm going to jump in again because we're
Please,
just about
please.
out of time. And I know that you want to talk about Dragonfly. Uh,
Yes.
and it's time for you to leave the audience with some words of wisdom. So,
Okay. So,
I'm going to give you those 2 opportunities to wrap up in the next 5 minutes.
okay, perfect. So in 2021, as I was healing, I felt called from the universe to create an online platform for Reiki masters. I realized just how lucky I was in order, to have found Pam and all the healing that came from that. And I had met all these wonderful Reiki ladies, and men too, but mostly ladies who had this amazing healing abilities, but didn't know how to start a business where, there was lots of logistical barriers for them. So I created an online platform where they can go and easily find clients, and more importantly, or just as importantly, an online platform where anybody can find Reiki whenever they need it. So you're having a bad day, rather than sitting in your bathtub crying, you can now go on Dragonfly Reiki Marketplace and book a Reiki session for the same day. We have Reiki practitioners from across the world, all different lineages, all different life experiences. You can search by specialties. So you can have a Reiki master who has walked the same path as you, whether it's suicide, depression, whatever. So it's really exciting, and it's growing quite quickly. That's my thank to the universe for the new life that I have. It is so outside my wheelhouse of experience, and it has taught me patience, because none of it's been on my timeline. It's the total universe timeline. And so we're now ready. All the kinks are out, all the big kinks are out. So now we're bringing it to market, and we're starting to share the story of how it came. I really do believe that everybody's lives are improved with Reiki. And then my final thought is that self-care really starts with self-love. And you have to love yourself if you want to heal. And a lot of us don't even know how to start with that. Reiki can help you. You have everything you need inside of you to heal and to kind of build the happy life that you can't even comprehend. But that all starts with self-love. And if you don't know how to love yourself, book a Reiki session.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Your story is just fascinating. That website that she was talking about is dragonflyreiki.me, and we will have a link to that from our website, yourspiritualjourneypodcast.com. So that link will be there if you wish to follow up with that. And as always, audience, take from this discussion what resonates with you and put the rest on a shelf until you're ready to deal with it. Until next time, this has been Your Spiritual Journey.